Cool. Welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we're doing on Thursday afternoon. Joining us from all the way out in New York City, author of Blood in the Garden, one of the great basketball books of the last 10 years, is our man Chris Herring. What's up, Chris? What's
good, Brian? How are you?
I know we're asking a lot of you. We're holding you back from getting to the Knicks game, so I appreciate your willingness to join us today. All right, joining us from Seattle. This is a special day, Herring, because every year so many of our listeners look forward to this podcast, look forward to when the machine comes on. I feel like this is later than normal, Kevin Pelton, but nonetheless, it is time for small sample size theater with Kevin Pelton. What's up, Pelton?
Now, see, that's a slightly different pronunciation. I always think of it as very British. It's got to be theater with the R, and it's more like masterpiece theater.
Small sample size theater with Kevin Pelton. I shouldn't do voices. I've been criticized for that in the past. I won't do it any longer. Pelton, we are at quarter pole of the season. So I feel like last year, like November 10th, I was like, is it time? And you're like, no. How about a little longer? November 17th, is it time? No. We got to December this year, Pelton. And so small sample size theater, this is where we take a look at some trends in the NBA and discuss whether they're actual legit or whether we're going to laugh when we listen back to this pod in February or March, which I sometimes do and always feel embarrassed about some of the stuff that I said. So without further ado, Pelton, the first thing you wanted to talk about was something that has been a frequent topic on this show. And every year it seems we hit a new frontier, and that is...
Three-point attempt rate is up, way up. And yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one because I think even if we had done this a few weeks ago, it still wouldn't really qualify as small sample size. This is something that tends to stabilize really quickly in contrast to a lot of other stats, how many threes are being shot league-wide. And yes, we have seen like new record highs for a long period of time, but one of the things that's interesting is starting in 2021, the last 4 seasons, three-point attempt rate had been stabilizing right around 39 to 40% of all shots. And, I think people were starting to wonder, have we reached a point where there aren't more threes that can be taken? And the answer to that, in the wake of the Boston Celtics winning the championship last year and a playoffs where the number of three-point attempts you took was actually a really good predictor of whether you won the game or not, is no, there are a lot more threes out there. Oh. And now we are at 42.3% of all shots are coming from threes. Wow. And it's continuing to tick slightly upward. It was around 42%, a couple weeks ago, keeps trickling upwards. And the biggest increases, I mean, this is what's amusing is like you'd think it's teams copycatting Boston, but they're actually one of the 3 teams that have increased their three-point attempt rate the most, along with Chicago and Charlotte. So now they're shooting 56% of their shots as threes, which would be easily the most ever. Houston and the Harden are
watching I know that Boston has played this way for a while, so I'm sort of immune. But when you watch Charlotte play, it feels like they start shooting threes when they walk across half court. For some reason, it feels like Charlotte takes even more than Boston, but I know that that's not true. But they certainly, Charles Lee, who came from Boston, the Boston staff definitely brought that down. I guess it'd be not all the way 95, but he brought that down on American Airlines.
the regional jet. Yeah, and then Chicago, it's interesting because they traded for Josh Giddey, but his ability to generate threes and then Zach LaVine being back, they're playing a lot of small lineups and they are really getting them up.
Herring, so here's my thing. I want to be new. I want to be open to new things. I want to embrace things. I don't want to, as the gray hairs start coming in, I don't want to be one of those guys, but I think we're out of balance. I think there's too many threes happening. I don't think it's good for the game. I'm not saying you never shoot them, but I think there's too many. And I think, at some point you do have to worry about, I understand why they're shooting. I'm not questioning the coaching. I'm not questioning the strategy. It's obviously clear. I can still remember when I was covering Kent State back in about 2001-ish. This coach who was coaching at Ohio University, Tim O'Shea, he was the first coach that I think I mentioned this on a recent pod. I thought about it more. I think his team took like 36 threes in a 40-minute college game, and they didn't shoot well. They shot like 8 of 40, 36 or something. And I thought it was ridiculous, the amount of threes they were taking. And I was covering the game. I was just out of college. And I asked him after the game, I go, why does your team take so many threes? And he goes, well, 2 of 6 from 3 is just the same as 3 of 6 from 2. And it never had it put to me that basically, So like it's been 20 years since, the basic math was explained to me by a coach who was annoyed because they lost. I've embraced it ever since, but I think we're a little out of balance, and I think it's moving more out of balance in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there obviously was something to be said for the fact that Boston won with this style, that they're just going to flood teams with threes. They've been doing it even since before they won the title, but between when the Warriors were there and the Rockets were in the conversation every year for the title, trends take hold, and I think that they are shinier when a team wins a title with that sort of style of play, regardless of whether other teams really have the necessary components to really truly replicate the success. They are going to try a lot of the same thing. And I think even down to roster construction, the team that I cover most primarily, the Knicks, seem to make some Celtics type moves by getting a stretch 5, by going to go spend a lot on a role player like Mikal Bridges, who obviously, the thought process was, we're going to go spend a lot on him the way that the Celtics went out and got Derek White. Now, what I think is interesting about it, when we talk about, one of the things I know we're set to talk about on this pod is just kind of the polarization of the league in general between the really good teams and the really terrible teams in this league. When you have so many of these games and so many of these teams that are struggling so badly, it makes me wonder a little bit how much of the stratification of the shots is coming from the fact that you've got teams that are just so far behind in some of these games where this is the quickest way to catch up. And frankly, over the last few years, we've seen a bunch of comebacks from 20 points down where this is just the quickest way to get back in the game if you're going to make a comeback. And so I wonder a little bit about that. I wonder a little bit too about the NBA Cup recently, just in terms of the point differential stuff, where I saw the same clip everybody else did of the Lakers game the other night, where there were like 8 threes in a row that were just guys grabbing a rebound, coming down and shooting threes, but the point differential mattered in a way that normally doesn't in NBA games.
Yeah, so Jackson, our resident football fan, he was asking about how the advent of the 2-deep safety in the NFL, where they basically put the guys way back instead of having like a free safety and a strong safety, where the strong safety would always be in run support. Am I right on? Am I even close on that, Jackson, or is my ignorance in football showing? But the 2-deep safety really took away some of the deep ball that was happening in the NFL and kind of capped or regulated it. Is there an NBA equivalent to that, Pelton, or are we out of our depth?
I don't think there is, just because of the fact that there's. Part of the reason, and we're going to touch on this a little bit more in a second, part of the reason the 3-point attempts are up is because players are able to shoot from so much deeper. You mentioned, the Hornets being a threat across half court. I mean, that's LaMelo Ball's game, as it is for so many of these players coming into the league that have watched Steph Curry and Damian Lillard for a period of time. And that's one of the things I think that makes it difficult is defenses are more aggressive playing up on the perimeter, but that just creates, you have so much more ground to cover if guys are shooting from 28, 30 feet as opposed to just 23 feet exactly. And then the other element of it is, to the math aspect, the average 2-point shot is now better than the average 3-point shot. It has been for a few years now. But part of the reason for that average is because, so if you take the effective field goal percentage of twos, it's now, it's 55%, and it's 52% or something. Because teams take smarter twos, basically closer to the basket, more efficient 2-pointers. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, part of it is because you've traded off those long twos that you were shooting at 40% for threes that you're shooting at 36%, and that is a clear math win. And then the other element of it is, look, the more you're guarding the 3-point line, the more space there is to drive. And that's part of why, teams are scoring at such a high rate around the basket. I think sometimes one of the things that does irk me about the 3-point discussion is that people think of it as it's a trade-off between oh, we want threes and not shots at the rim. And that's not it. Like shots at the rim, remain relatively high. They haven't changed that much in NBA history, at least in the period where we have, this sort of tracking going back to 96, 97. What's changed is that 18 footers have become 25 footers.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's, I don't really know what the league can do about it. I think just in general, I think we're going to see at the trade deadline, there's going to be less action because there's fewer bad contracts and because teams are a little bit smarter. And, I just think the intelligence into the game, into the way the teams are operated and the gameplay is taking away some of the stuff that the fans kind of liked, at least some of the older school fans. So it is what it is. Before we go on to talk about the Lakers, I do want to mention ESPN Plus content is now available on Disney Plus bundle subscriptions. You can stream events live, original content, and studio shows from ESPN Plus. Start streaming now with the bundle from Disney Plus. Okay, I don't know if you guys heard, but the Lakers got blown out 2 games in a row, got completely embarrassed in Miami on Wednesday night. Just non-effort defensively in that game. I don't know if it's a small sample size, Pelton, because this Lakers team is essentially the same team that they had last year, but they are 27th in defense. And for the last 10 games, they are 27th in offense. And 10 games is kind of a small sample size, but the 22 games they have played is quite a bit bigger. What can we take away from the Lakers, especially as they're coming off of just getting embarrassed for a couple of days on the road trip?
Yeah, I think this is a case where even though the overall sample size is maybe at the medium range, like 20 games is about when this season's results become as predictive of the rest of the season as your expectations coming into the season. So it's a meaningful indicator in that regard. But we have these 2 very different stretches for the Lakers who, they were 10-4 and feeling good about life not that long ago. And all of a sudden it seems like crisis mode already with JJ Redick questioning the team's effort. I think I'm more concerned about the defense than the offense, because you want to talk about small sample size. One of the things that has flipped is LeBron through the first, couple weeks of the season, everyone was highlighting at this late stage in his career, it's the highest 3-point percentage he's ever shot. And the danger in comparing 10 games to a full season is that can change in a hurry as he's gone in this massive 3-point slump since then. So I think offensively, I'm not that worried. Defensively, I am concerned because if you look at the opponent shot quality in this stretch, they haven't had good opponent shot quality the last couple of years based on the second spectrum tracking. They've ranked around 20th in the league. In this recent stretch where they've really struggled, that has gone to the easiest shot quality in the league. And, I watched the start of that game against Miami.
That's not good.
No, yeah, you don't want that. I watched the start of that game against Miami on Wednesday night, and it seemed like Tyler Hero was just getting warm-up jumpers repeatedly.
That's right. So that's a thing. That's a thing, Herring. What's alarming about the Laker defense is that, and maybe not every night, but a lot of nights, the teams don't have to work that hard to get the shot. That was definitely the case in Miami. Tyler Hero made 7 straight threes in the third quarter. I don't know what the actual metrics said. I felt 6 of them were basically practice threes. I thought 1 they got a decent contest on. Maybe you could argue 2. But that's the thing. Some of 3-point shooting is deemed luck. I know we've talked about that before, Pelton. The same team can get the same 10 looks, and sometimes they make 7, sometimes they make 4, and it doesn't mean that the opponent played better or worse defense. That's just the nature of the game, which is why these teams a lot of times just play percentages and let the famous, it's a make or miss league. But Herring, what's alarming about the Laker defense is that teams are cracking it without much problem, and that's why you got JJ Redick out there talking about accountability.
Yeah, you're 100% right, and I think it's funny that Pelton would be among the people that says this most loudly. I think that you have to take certain numbers with a grain of salt. As we're learning how, especially defensively, where, when you talk about small sample sizes, you can look at something for the first 3 weeks and think that someone is a fantastic defender based on their advanced metrics on the defensive end. And here's one for you. The Lakers, they were closing out on shots last night. I think it said that it was the second or third highest number of closeouts that they had in a game this season, which in theory, it's like, wow, they were closing out. They were playing really aggressively. But based on the fact that right after the game, you've got JJ kind of really lighting into their effort, they weren't effective closeouts. They weren't running hard enough. They weren't really closing out hard enough, even if they were closing out. Because, let's see, just the basic numbers, if you look at them, 33 wide open shots that the Heat got, 19 wide open makes for the Heat. They shot 58% on those looks, 1.4 points per shot. The average closest Laker defender was 5.6 feet away from the shooter.
I'm going to sound like
when the ball
McMahon.
got released.
That sounds like how tall some of them refs are. Is that how'd that go?
that was actually pretty good. This is actually really funny.
It's hard to make Pelton laugh like that.
That was pretty good, actually. I feel like Tim himself.
You could lay a ref down in between Tyler Hero and them Laker defenders.
The ref might be named Tyler too.
But it's not good enough defensively, and it's I think that there was a lot at the beginning of the season just with how well Anthony Davis was playing. Look, you're going to count it a blessing anytime you get MVP level play out of anybody. Certainly when they're playing across or next to LeBron, but it's sometimes asking too much of him. And I think, frankly, the Lakers have a bunch of guys that they're all part of the rotation, and together they're really not ideal defensively. Guys that help their spacing a little bit, but then when you throw them out there together defensively, they don't really work. And so I'm not sure what the workaround is, because, as you said, this is essentially the same team, plus or minus a guy here or there. But it's not ideal. And the fact that we're now also asking the question of, is LeBron burned out to some extent? Obviously played better last night offensively, but you're talking about having to give him more breathers, and this is without factoring in the idea of AD or LeBron having had any injuries, which at their age, with their injury histories, is not unlikely at some point. That's a thing. Like, and this is Bontemps' thing. He said it all last year. The Lakers so far, they're 12-10. That's pretty good. In the East, they'd be in great shape. They're not like having a terrible season. But as Pelton mentioned, they were 10-4. They're not a 10-4 team. They're not as good, and they're not as bad as they've showed the last couple of games. But they've played 22 games. LeBron has missed none. AD has missed one, and AD's been a little hobbled, like at times with that plantar fasciitis in his foot. And here's my small sample size theater, I think, on the Lakers. Last year, they were fourth in the league in pace. They were generally a fast-paced team under Darvin Ham, and it helped them get easy baskets in transition. You saw LeBron out a lot of times in transition, either leading the break or finishing the break. This year, JJ Redick has come in, and he has wanted to run the offense through Anthony Davis. And by the way, I think a lot of people, including a lot of people who work in the NBA, feel like that's a good decision. But that has slowed them down. When they have elected to play more in the half court with Anthony Davis, they slowed down. So last year they were fourth in the league in pace. This year, through 22 games, they're 19th. So they play slower. But that means that they are more susceptible to Anthony Davis's rises and falls. So Anthony Davis has been in a slump. He's had two of his lowest scoring games of the year back-to-back. Also out of the half court, LeBron is going to rely more on the three-pointer, because in half-court sets, LeBron has been leaning into the three-pointer because he's not as effective at beating his man off the dribble as he used to be. That's not a hot take. That's just the truth. LeBron would admit it. LeBron has developed his three-point shot. And last year, he had a great year shooting the three. Shot over 40% for the first time, I think, in like 10 years. Definitely, this is his best three-point shooting season of his career last year, and he was having the best three-point shooting start of his career over the first 15 games of this season. But when you play in the half court and you rely on that three-point shot from LeBron and those other guys more, you're going to have a little bit more variance. So bottom line is this: the Lakers are not good enough defensively to survive LeBron and AD in offensive slumps. They're just not. Maybe you could get by a game or two if D'Angelo Russell gets hot, or if you get Austin Reeves with a good game. And, this team has been this way for a while. They've been a poor defensive team for a while. If you go back and look, the last time they made significant roster changes was the trade deadline in 2023. The summer of 2023, they re-signed Jared Vanderbilt, $60 million deal, or $50 million deal, I think it was. That has not worked out. He has played 29 games since then. Now, that has been injury-related. It is not because he's a bad person, but it hasn't worked out. They signed Gabe Vincent. It has not worked out. Injuries also played a factor there, but he's been healthy this year and has not been an impact player. They signed Christian Wood.
has not worked out. Also, injuries have been a factor there, but that has not worked out. They let a couple of guys go this year on minimum contracts in Taurean Prince and Spencer Dinwiddie, who frankly would be helping them right now. Not necessarily Dinwiddie defensively, but he's playing well for the Mavs. They would use him. And they elected to, instead of re-signing Taurean Prince, they signed a Max Christie, and Max Christie hasn't had any sort of impact. So the guys that they have signed over the last 2 summers, they haven't really worked out, okay? And then you look at the fact that they elected not to make a trade at the deadline last year. They elected not to make a trade at the draft. They elected not to make a significant trade in the summer. Their move over the year was basically, trading out Taurean Prince's money to pay Max Christie and also drafting Dalton Connect. Those moves haven't impacted them defensively. And JJ's decision to play slower has, put more of a burden on their offense. And so as a result, you have a team that is right where we thought they would be, which is, quite frankly, in the play-in zone right now. All right, let's switch over to the East Coast.
Can I give you one more alarming stat?
No, you may not. I moved on, dang it. All right, yes, go ahead.
This is it's not a good one for the Lakers, but it's a good one. So last night was their 4th loss of the season by 25 points or more. The only teams who have more than that are New Orleans and Portland, which means the Lakers have as many losses by 25 plus points as a team we're going to talk about later that could be among the worst in NBA history. And if you
let's save that. I don't want to have criticism back to back, Pelton. I want to sad, happy.
You want to be positive. But if you look in NBA history, there have only been 3 teams that have been blown out as often in the first 22 games of the season as the Lakers and have gone 500 or better. So that's the 1981-82 Denver Nuggets.
We all remember that team. Who could forget?
Yeah. The 2009-10 Chicago Bulls, which I can't say I have any particular memory of that team either. And then the intriguing
was that the year that they got the number 1 seed? They got the number 1 pick of Derrick Rose?
Vinny Del Negro.
Oh,
maybe that was Derrick Rose's rookie. Maybe that was Derrick Rose's rookie year. No, Derrick Rose was drafted in 2008. Right, yeah. His second year. All right, never mind. Yeah. Sorry to digress.
And then the 2021-22 Memphis Grizzlies.
Was that the year that Vinny Del Negro squared off with John Paxson and they threw punches at each other?
This feels like it would be an appropriate place to use McMahon's accent now too. Just
I'm done. I'm done with imitations. I'm already going to be criticized enough. All right, good news.
I heard you mentioned the Grizzlies though. That was crazy. So that was the year that Ja was hurt so much.
No, that was the year before where they lost to the Warriors in the second round and were the number 2 seed and just regularly got blown out. So I guess if you want hope as a Lakers fan, that one team in NBA history completely turned things around.
Okay. All right. So Herring, let's talk about some team that plays down that road from you, the New York Knicks. The Knicks defensively are in the bottom 10. They have been for all season. Tom Thibodeau routinely sort of defends his team by bringing his own set of facts to the press conferences. But the one thing that you can't deny is that the Knicks have been indeed an elite offensive team. Karl Towns is doing exactly what they thought Pelton, at least on the offensive end, putting up. Towns is having an absolutely amazing offensive season. He's a bona fide all-star. But Pelton, is this sample size enough to convince you that this Knicks team can score enough offensively to get back to a deep playoff run?
I think it's a maybe on this one. This is I don't have a strong take. What's fascinating to me is how different the Knicks are offensively than they were last season when they were 7th in offensive rating. And they were basically average in our ESPN colleague Dean Oliver has the 4 factors of basketball. So on offense, it's your shooting, it's your offensive rebounding, your ability to get to the free throw line, and you're avoiding turnovers. And they were average in 3 of those 4, and they were number 1 by a mile in offensive rebounding. And that translated into the 7th best offense last year. This year, they are average in offensive rebounding because they don't have Isaiah Hartenstein and haven't had Mitchell Robinson yet. And Towns is spending so much of his time on the perimeter. But they are number 2 in effective field goal percentage behind only the Cleveland Cavaliers and number 5 in turnover rate. So it's a very different mix. It's a little bit less sustainable because they're shooting 40% from 3, second only to the Cavs. I don't know if they're going to stay quite that hot, but I do think
I don't think the Cavs are going to stay that hot either, though, quite frankly.
True.
But, So Herring, the Knicks have zoomed past the Celtics and the Cavs to take over the spot as the number one offense in the league. Towns is shooting like 45% on threes. He's averaging 25. He's leading the league in rebounding, by the way, 13 a game. You go to the Knicks games all the time. You're talking to the coaches and players. Can this Knicks team, can they remain as the number one offense in the league?
I think they can, and I think that I don't think anybody would be particularly surprised if they did, for some of the reasons that you talked about. They're hoping to get Precious Achiuwa back, if not tonight, then maybe in the next game. Mitchell Robinson, to Kevin's point, would help boost their offensive rebounding, which is something that they were the best team in the league at before. And I think it's also worth noting that week to week, Knicks fans panic quite a bit about how Mikal Bridges is playing, and so
does Bontemps. Actually, I wouldn't call it panicking. I would call it commenting. But yeah.
Well, commenting strongly, because Tim and I are normally sitting together at these Knicks games where Mikal Bridges, up until a game that he got to play against the lowly Pelicans and had a career best game from three, was shooting a career worst.
By the way, that day we recorded a podcast basically talking about how he could not make a shot, and then he made 7 threes that night. This is known as the reverse Hoop Collective jinx, which sometimes takes place as well.
Very much. It helps that the Pelicans, are missing however many guys they are as rough a team as they are. But that said, I don't think it takes away from the fact that Bridges has not been all that great. There's all sorts of data, whether it's a small sample size or not, that when he is screened and when teams make contact on him on a screen, that essentially they're scoring at the highest rate in the league on the Knicks when he is the man being screened, which speaks to the fact of, do teams feel like they can get something with Mikal Bridges being the defender, which that's noteworthy, just because this is a guy that finished second in the league. Anyway,
what
you were asking about their offense.
This is a guy that the Knicks traded 5 first-round picks for. Now, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I don't think you can look at the transaction that way. I think you also have to lump in the fact that Brunson took an incredibly team-friendly contract almost in conjunction with that move. I think that's part of it. But I was talking about this to an executive a couple days ago, and he's like, that's all well and good. He still will walk around as the guy who got traded for 5 first-round picks, and he's their 4th best player. And if you're cool with that, you're cool with that. But that's just the truth. Right. Now, what I would say about Mikal Bridges is, when you are going to see and feel his value is when you're in the playoffs and maybe you're playing against the Celtics and you have to deal with the Tatum Brown perimeter, and you've got him and OG Anunoby, and he's able to impact those guys, and then you're never going to remember how many picks you gave for him. But what you're saying, Chris Herring, is that teams are coming into games, and in their game plan, they're like, we don't care how many first-round picks were traded for him. We don't care where he is on the defensive rankings or the defensive All-NBA defensive voting. We think he's a defender that we can take advantage of, and their actions are speaking to that, and that's what the stats and this sample size are telling you.
Absolutely. There's that part of it. And again, I know your initial question was about how realistic is it that they could finish as the top offense in the league. And I think if you're the Knicks on some level, you have to feel good about that. Sure, they might come down from 40%. Cat has already come down from the 53 or 54% he was shooting from three just a week or two ago to a more, 45, which is still incredible. But I think the fact that Bridges has struggled to this extent, and I think to me, the biggest thing that is like a glaring, blinking red light for him is not what he shot from three, which I'm sure will stabilize. It's how infrequently he goes to the line. This is someone that went to the line 300 plus times last year, and this season is going to the line less than once a game. And when you watch him, is fading away on his jump shots at almost the highest rate. I think Jalen Williams is the only guy that fades away more frequently than him on jump shot attempts. So he's kind of shying away from contact. And that, to me, if they can
that's
get
been Bontemps. Bontemps has
switch.
Been all over that. Yeah, Bontemps is, that's something that, that's surprising to me, because Mikal Bridges, that's not his MO,
At all.
But I will say this: 2 years ago, when he came to the Nets, Now, granted, that was only a third of the season. He played like 30 games with them. He averaged 7 free throws a game. Now, granted, he was getting the ball in that spot. He was going downhill. He was sort of slashing at that time. It's not comparison to maybe what he did more in the spot up role he's playing now. My point is, not long ago, he averaged 7 free throws a game. This year, he's averaging less than 1. Less than 1. Last year with the Nets, 4 a game. So less than 1 free throw a game for a guy who leads the league in minutes. He's taking 15 shots a game. Now that I think about that, Pelton, it's hard to shoot 15 times a game and get fouled less than once a game. Because if you get fouled once a game, you get 2 free throws. So you're basically, if you average less than 1 free throw a game, help me if I'm incorrect here, Pelton, you're basically getting fouled. You're getting to the line like a little less than once every other game. Over the course of taking, in that spot, you're taking like 30 to, he's probably getting fouled like every 33 shots or something like that. That seems crazy.
Yeah, his free throw attempt rate is basically 1 for every 25 shot attempts between 20 and 25.
So never trust my math.
Incredible.
So, I mean, but that's again total free throws, not trips to the free throw line. To your point, and yeah, I mean, I had that first thought. Well, like, of course,
he's getting fouled. Maybe not on jump, maybe not on shots. Maybe he's getting fouled. Maybe he's going to the line when he's not even shooting. It's like when they're in the bonus.
Right. But of course, he's not going to the free throw line as much as in Brooklyn, where he was handling the ball. But even you look at his Phoenix days, his lowest free throw rate of attempts to field goal attempts was .183. In 2021-22, which would have been the season I think that they were the number 1 seed. This year his rate is .046. So it's
see, Herring, this is the difference between me and Pelton. Pelton talks in free throw rate percentages like .106, and I just say he went to the line seven times a game. That's how me and Pelton are different. I am saying that Pelton is he's definitely more precise, and that's better. But like, this is where Pelton and I operate on different planes. But anyway,
I think
despite all that, the Knicks are number 1. The Knicks are number 1 in offense.
Exactly. That's why I think, like, if you can get that flip to switch for him, because exactly what you guys, the two of you just talked about, it's not like he hasn't been a third or a fourth guy before. I wonder a little bit if there is a challenge in coming off the Brooklyn experience, a losing team, a team that needed him to handle versus a team that does not need him to, but would certainly like him to. And I think, to Brian's point before, you need him in particular against a team like Boston. You're going to need him defensively. We know that. There's no way you would have given up that number of picks without his defense. But you're also probably going to need a third or a fourth guy to generate some offense, not just be the recipient of catch and shoots or, putting the ball on the floor for one dribble to beat a closeout and then taking a mid-range jump shot. Like, at some point you would love for him to go off for 25 or 30 in a series because he's just aggressive. And we haven't seen that. We've obviously asked him about it, and he says, I'm still just trying to find I'm still just trying to fit in. But you would think even by accident, to your point, when you really dug into his free throw numbers there, that by accident you would feel like he gets more free throw attempts than that. But he really is not finishing much at the basket this year. And that, to me, the fact that they're number 1 offense without that, if they can get that contribution from him in addition to what they already have, I'm not sure anybody can touch them offensively, to be honest with you.
Jalen Brunson, his scoring is down this year, which is partially related to Karl Towns coming in. But Jalen Brunson's scoring is down, but his efficiency has been up a little bit, if I'm not mistaken. His three-point shooting is a little bit up. His field goal percentage is a little bit up. That has been a positive, right? Not relying as much on Brunson. Isn't that maybe one of the reasons the Knicks have been more efficient overall?
It is. Part of it, too. Yeah, a big part of it, too. We talked before about the Lakers and kind of how
career high in assists,
slowing down their offense. Yeah, he's loved having Karl Towns. There was like a 2 or 3 game blip to start the season where Towns, it was one night after Towns had 8 shots that, we get to the locker room and that's the first question we're asking is like, how is Towns only taking 8 shots in 36 minutes? And Brunson said, I've got to do better. And then the next game, like clockwork, Brunson was passing every single opportunity to Towns. Towns went off. Brunson slumped for the next week or week and a half, but you could tell that it was him trying to find that balance. And I feel like they've found that. They're extremely efficient, maybe if not the most efficient, then the second most efficient duo and pick and roll tandems. And so that part has been figured out. I think that the other big difference and notable difference with this team is that they were so ISO heavy last year. They haven't completely gone away from that, but they were the team last year that by far took the most shots in the last 4 seconds of the clock. And this season, it's not a massive difference, but I think there's something like 24th or 25th in the league, which moving up those 5 spots, just that percentage and a half frequency difference of getting your shots earlier in the clock. The earlier you shoot in the clock, the higher your efficiency tends to be. That's made a big difference for a team like this that does not have to rely on playing out the whole clock. They get open shots faster now with Karl Towns just because of how spread out everything is. And that will shift as they get their rebounders back between Achua and Mitchell Robinson at some point. But they are very happy right now with what they're getting offensively, especially considering that Mikal Bridges has not truly turned in a Mikal Bridges type season yet.
All right, that was happy. Now we transition to sad. You mentioned it earlier, Pelton. The 2-17 Washington Wizards. Remember, they were 2-2 at one point. Those were heady days when they were 2-2. They've lost 15 in a row, as at this moment. I think they're playing tonight. Maybe they're playing tomorrow. Anyway, they are getting beat bad. How bad, Kevin Pelton?
Well, they are being outscored by 15.8 points per game, which would be the worst in NBA history. There's only been one other team that has been below minus 14, and that was the 1992-93 Dallas Mavericks, who were minus 15.2 per game.
Wow. The thing about it is I'm afraid that the Wizards, if they do anything, it's going to be trading off pieces. And I think, I watched them play the Cavs the other night, and, Jonas Valanciunas was a wrecking ball out there. He sent both Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland to the locker room within about 5 minutes of each other, and he almost took Jared Allen's arm off a little bit later in the game. He's, I think, a strong candidate to be traded. They almost traded Kyle Kuzma a year ago. Kuzma, in one of the strangest stories of the year, they gave Kuzma the option to reject the trade to Dallas, which he did, even though he doesn't have it in his contract. Kuzma is starting to pop up in trade rumors again, and I'm kind of like, why? He's not having a good year. He's averaging I think he's averaging a career low. I guess 1 year, his last year with the Lakers, he scored a little bit less than this, but he's averaging about 6 fewer points per game. His percentages are career lows shooting wise. I'm not sure that he is exactly, making a very strong case to be traded. But I think he will. His is a name. They've almost traded him a year ago. I think he'll be out there. My point is, I'm not sure it's going to get better because I think they're likely to lose, quote unquote, talent as the season goes along. So Pelton, do you think this is something that could remain historic?
I think it's got that potential because, as you say, on average, the worst teams in NBA history, the teams that have been outscored by 10 points or more, have actually played better in the first 20 games than the rest of the season for all those reasons that you laid out. So, normally we'd say small sample size, regression to the mean, all those things that I normally say on this podcast. I don't know if that's going to work in Washington's favor to the same degree. There are 2 teams that have been worse in terms of point differential for their first 20 games of the season. The 1970-71 Cleveland Cavaliers.
Oh my God, that was their inaugural season.
I didn't realize that.
Yes, it was.
Wow.
The members of the team, unfortunately, are passing away, but I've talked to enough of them. There was some story, and I mean, I should have fact checked this before I say this, but there was some story where they went on a West Coast trip. And back then, you could get this is back when all the teams were flying commercial. Back then, you could get 10 or 11 p.m. flights up and down the West Coast. And there was one, this West Coast trip, a 5 or 6 game West Coast trip, where the team negotiated a really favorable hotel rate in Portland. And so they just flew back to Portland after every game. Played in San Diego, fly back to Portland.
What?
Play in San Francisco, fly back to Portland. I mean, I'll look it up because I think it was this really long thing. But it was like, hell, we flew back to Portland after every game. So we didn't have I'm going to look it up right now, but let's just say that that 1-27 start with the Cavs, it might not have been, it's not something you want to bring up. Let's just leave it at that.
Oh,
no, they did win 15 games that season. So the other team that started worse was also those 1992-93 Dallas Mavericks. And in a story that has come up on this podcast before, part of the reason they started so poorly, they were 4-50 at one point, is because Jim Jackson was one of the very last holdouts.
That's right.
In NBA history.
Mark Termini, his agent, told the story on the podcast about a year and a half ago about the blow-by-blows of that podcast, or the blow-by-blows of that holdout. Should you want to delve back into that, as I'm sure many Mavericks fans do.
Wow.
So after they signed him, they went 7-21, and I remember that because I'm old enough. I was at one of those 7 wins. They beat a very good Sonics team that went to the Western Conference Finals in Seattle in April. So, we'll see if that sort of help is on the way for the Washington Wizards, but it doesn't seem that it is.
Okay, so that 1970-71 Cavs team, there was a West Coast trip. There was where they opened the season and they started the West. They started the trip on the West Coast. They played at Portland on a Friday. Then it's Saturday they played in San Francisco. Then on Tuesday they played back in Portland. So they flew back to Portland. All right. Then on Thursday they played in San Diego. All right. Did they go back to Portland? I don't know. Then they played in Phoenix. Then they played in LA. Is it possible that the story was just magnified because they played in Portland twice on the trip and it wasn't the case? I don't know. But the story that I heard was that they would fly back to Portland. They fly back to Portland because the hotel rate is cheaper. But I just want to say that this is how the league welcomed the Cleveland Cavaliers in 1970 to the NBA. They opened the Cavaliers team opened with a 7 game road trip to open their season. And then later in the same month, they had a 6 game road trip to the West Coast where they played in Portland twice more. So in the first month of existence, as an organization, the Cleveland Cavaliers played 4 games in Portland on 4 separate trips. Maybe that's why they kept in the hotel. They just rented it for the whole month. And my point on telling you this whole story, by the way, they lost. They did win. Their first ever win, I just want you to know, was in Portland in one of those games. And that 127 started game was in Portland. The current modern day Wizards are playing worse than that Cavs team as an expansion team that had to play 4 games in Portland in the first month of the season.
Portland was also an expansion team that year, so apparently they wanted to build that rivalry.
I see. Okay, well, that
but I think my favorite part of looking at this early season schedule, maybe were they still building the arena? Is that why they had this long road trip?
No, but they played in a dump. It was not still building the arena. Maybe they were still laying down the court.
They started the season on a Wednesday in Buffalo, and then started that 6 game West Coast trip Friday in Portland. Like, we couldn't have at least gotten them a game in Kansas City or something? I guess they weren't even there yet. Cincinnati?
I guess not. But I'm glad we walked down this road of the 1970 Cavs.
Yeah, I have too.
1970 Cavs schedule. Because I've heard people tell me stories. I'm now starting to wonder if the story that they played the whole West Coast and they only stayed in Portland is now a bit of a memory error because they just kept going back to Portland. But I like the way I told it in the first place.
I do too. It was more fun that way.
It's apocryphal.
But anyway, Herring, the Wizards stink.
They're a rough watch, and I mean it's tough too because there's a lot of teams that aren't good, obviously, and you take no joy in watching the teams that aren't good and don't have a pathway to become good. You look at the Wizards and you're like, okay, they're rebuilding, so they've got young guys. But they've got just enough of a mix of like the vets where you were talking about Kuzma, obviously, and Jordan Poole trying to kind of like rebuild his career after the Warriors years, and Valanciunas, who's, not knocking guys out of the sky, but just hard fouls. And it's like, that's not fun to watch. I respect the way the Wizards went about doing business, where they looked last year at Kuzma and said, look, we could do this, we could not. It's not something we need to do. How do you feel about it? But it just raises the question. I remember, I like the way you put it before, of like one of the more like confusing, weird stories from last season. I was so thrown off, and like, look, everybody's life is their own. I don't know what's best for Kyle Kuzma, but I remember being stunned that he had a chance to go to a team that then did end up going to the finals. Kyle Kuzma's won a championship before, and he knows what championship level basketball can look like, should look like. The Wizards have none of that, and they had none of that last year. The idea of, even if you didn't think that the Mavs were going to make the finals, a chance to play competitive basketball, why not do that? Kuzma's response is, I want to rebuild something here. They're just so far away from that at this point.
Well, the one thing I will say about him,
even worse.
His contract does, they signed him to a 4-year, like $80 million deal. His contract does descend. So over the next couple of years, it goes down a couple of million a year. So I do believe at some point they will be able to find a taker for him, and maybe they'll be able to do better than the 2 picks that they were getting in that deal that was vetoed. And I think that's what they were saying. I don't think they would have given him the option if they were in love with the trade. I think they were probably on the fence. They were up on the fence about it. Pelton, Jordan Poole has 2 years and $65 million after this season left on the deal. He is averaging 21 points on 42% shooting from 3. Is there a market for him? Do you think a team would take? He's obviously got certain baggage with the way he plays and certain actions with teammates. Do you think there's a market for Jordan Poole with that contract?
I think probably not until next season when it's expiring, and it could be you're taking back a longer deal.
No, it's not expiring next year, sir. 2 more.
Oh, sorry. 2 years after this.
Yeah,
oh, God.
After this. I underlined your thing. And honestly, I think 3 years ago, I think you might have had a better chance of trading Jordan Poole. But right now, with these apron teams, where every dollar when you're team building like matters, and the one thing if I could really just put the whole apron thing, which is complicated, if I could just sort of make it uncomplicated, it's not about your owner saving money on luxury tax. It's about, if your salaries are too high, you can't do things with your roster. You can't make trades. You're hamstrung. And so it's not so much about Jordan Poole the player, but when you trade for a player who's probably overpaid, and it potentially leads to you being tied in. The last thing you want to do is have a contract you can't trade. It's another thing to have a contract you're not allowed to trade. And that is complicating matters. And, the Poole trade, I think, happened before the CBA was finalized, I think. I wonder if the trade would have happened if the CBA had been finalized, knowing that. But anyway, they were betting on Poole, but that's another guy who theoretically could be traded. By the way, one of the fastest ways to lose in the NBA, if you want to tank, is to have young guards. And, they've been starting Bub Carrington, their rookie out of Pitt, and they've been playing Kaishan George a lot. And you play young guards, you're going to lose, and they are. Okay, we have to go to a happy one now. That's the rules, Pelton. Maybe we'll just go to a neutral one. The East versus West imbalance. I've heard grumbling that it's never been worse. I'm not sure the stats still back that up. A couple of weeks ago, it was the worst ever, dating back to 1950. It was the percentage-wise, the West had the highest percentage ever in one conference versus another. Where are we at now?
Yeah, this is one where it was small sample size theater, and now that we've gotten up to a medium sample size, it has flipped. The credit to John Schumann of NBA.com. He was the first person I saw mention this. The West was 37-15 in games between the two conferences through November 17th. If you look at it since then, the East actually has the upper hand at 20-13. So overall, the West is still winning 59% of the games, which would be the most since 2014, but it's no longer meaningfully different from last year's 58%. And one of the stats I love about this, in probably leading the charge here in that East comeback, the Brooklyn Nets, who went 3-0 on their West Coast road
They
trip
came out West and started, and by the way, like, quality wins.
They didn't stay in Portland.
They didn't stay in. In all honesty, considering Joe's size set up in San Diego, they might have wanted to just stay in San Diego. That I think actually would have been a different discussion, is go back and forth from San Diego up and down the West Coast. But whatever they did, Jordy Fernandez got wins. They at the time they beat the Suns. The Suns were hot. It was before. Actually, I think it was maybe Durant maybe got hurt in that game. But yeah, they the Nets are kind of overperforming. They're a small sample size. They would probably like it to have less wins. But
they are already more than halfway to their preseason over/under line of 18.5 wins at ESPN Bet with their 10 wins.
Wow.
So yeah, they got to make some trades fast.
On NBA Today, we were showing some highlights of Cooper Flagg last night in that game where Duke beat Auburn. He had a pretty good game. And we showed for the first time in a long time the top 4 teams, the percentages to get one of the top 4 picks. Obviously the Wizards were first, the Jazz were up there, the Raptors, and I think the Pelicans. And nowhere did I see the Brooklyn Nets, which is not what I think their plan was when they traded for the access to their 2025 and 26 picks back earlier this year with the Houston Rockets. Herring, are you at ease about the East a little bit more as they've rallied back behind the ferocious Brooklyn Nets in your town there?
A little bit. I mean, I think a big part of it, and I'd have to go back and look and see how many of the games were against the East. I feel like, to me, when I saw those numbers that Kevin was referencing from John Schumann, it just made me zero in on the Bucks and the Sixers, who just were expected to be at worst 3rd, 4th, 5th contenders in the East, and just were among the worst teams in the league for the first few weeks. And so the Bucks have kind of righted the ship. They had been on a winning streak until very recently. The Sixers obviously have not righted the ship, but even one team meaningfully kind of changing their season or kind of shifting gears like that can make the difference when you're talking about a sample size this small, or just like how brutal the league is. You can take maybe a Wizards team that is really brutal, but when you have the Wizards and the Sixers and the Bucks all really brutal at the same time, one of those teams can make a big shift. So I don't make much of it now. I think stuff will level out. I think if Embiid is ever able to come back and have his conditioning, which obviously at this point feels like a pretty big if, then you kind of take an even bigger bite out of that problem, so to speak.
All right, well, before we go, let's talk about the Bucks. So the Bucks started 2-8. Since that time, they are, I believe, 8-2. They won 8 out of 10 games. They just had their 7-game win streak snapped against the Hawks. Giannis is putting up incredible numbers. I think in the month of, I think I mentioned this on the pod earlier this week or maybe recently. In the month of November, he averaged 12 baskets in the paint per game, or just under 12 baskets in the paint per game, which is the most since prime Shaq around the turn of the century. And they're advanced to the quarterfinals of the NBA Cup. And getting a home game. They were the number 1 seed in the East in the NBA Cup, plus 50, went 4-0 in their group. But Pelton, I'll just say this. The wins that they had in this stretch were over the following teams: the Raptors, the Pistons in overtime, the Rockets, there's a good one, by 1 point. That was a big one. The Bulls, the Pacers, who are in a free fall at the moment, the Hornets, who they also lost to. They went 1-1 against the Hornets, but they did beat the Hornets. At the Miami Heat, that was a quality win, absolutely. Washington Wizards, which we just touched on. At the Pistons, okay, still on the road. That was a game to decide the group in the NBA Cup. I'll give the Pistons credit for that. However, the Pistons are several games under 500. I believe 5 or 6 games under 500. And then they played the Hawks, who were 500 at home, and lost to them. Second night of a back-to-back. So, look, this is the Eastern Conference. You're going to play some bad games. They're winning the games in front of them. But sample size, this run that they've had, they've gone 8-2 without Chris Middleton, who's coming back for Friday's game against the Celtics. Do you believe that the Bucks have turned the corner?
Yes and no. So I think as a regular season outfit, I think the Bucks are going to be fine. I think they will probably end up with a top 4 seed in the East and home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs, as we all expected coming in. Because, one of the debates that's happened on this podcast is, would you rather be the Sixers, where your stars have not played as you expected, or the Bucks, where Giannis has been playing so awesome and they weren't very good overall anyway? And I think the answer is you'd want to be the Bucks, because either those role players are going to regress to the mean and start playing better, which we've seen that with Gary Trent Jr. You look at those last 10 games, he's 50% on threes. We knew he wasn't going to shoot as poorly as he did, the first 10 games or so all season. He's too good a player for that. Or you just bench those guys and play somebody else who is going to be more productive for them than them. And that's what AJ Green has been kind of usurping Pat Connaughton's spot in the rotation, is a 3-point shooter and someone who really spaces the floor and is competitive defensively. But, even aside from Chris Middleton's return, the thing that concerns me is I still haven't seen a lot of two-way options for Milwaukee. Like AJ Green in a playoff series, he's been competitive defensively. Still not sure how well he's going to hold up if he's having to guard, elite wings on a regular basis. And Andre Jackson Jr., who's been starting for them and has been really good for them defensively because they need someone to be a wing stopper with this group. I think in a playoff series, his lack of shooting is going to become an issue. So I'm still not sure that they can go 8 or 9 deep, or 7 or 8 deep that you need to go in a playoff series when you're going against the very best of the Eastern Conference. That's my concern.
Yeah, Herring, they're going to face, it's going to get stress tests right away because they play the Bucks at home on Friday with Middleton. They do play those fighting Nets on Sunday, and then they have the NBA Cup game at home against Orlando, who's been the hottest team in the East, and then they play Cleveland. I think it's next Thursday. So we'll know over this next 7 days just how legit this 8-2 run is.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, a lot of us had the same question about the Knicks recently, where their schedule, the wins they've had recently, for the most part, were over pretty easy teams, and why we were so intrigued by, okay, now they have to play this Orlando team that's been on fire, and why it was so, eye-popping that they beat the stuffing out of the Magic the other night. Granted, at home, but, the Magic had like a 37-point cushion in order to make the NBA Cup, and the Knicks were pushing that even to the point where Orlando had to actually kind of scrap to keep their way in. The Bucks have had a pretty soft schedule, as you pointed out. They just played against Atlanta and dropped that game. Atlanta's been playing well lately, and so it kind of was a little bit of a stress test. Second night of a back-to-back, whatever. My concern with Milwaukee, really, even as they're playing better, is just I think the structure of that team is something that I have questions about. It's a team that fundamentally for years we watched have certain advantages that just don't really exist anymore. Giannis is obviously the biggest advantage, the biggest joker you can have. But this is a team that thrives in transition, the most efficient team in the league off live ball turnovers, but is bottom 5 in forcing turnovers, which fine. Okay, that's fine. But they're also dead last in offensive rebounds. So when you talk about extra possessions, where are you getting them from? They don't offensive rebound. When you remember when they had Mike Budenholzer and how at one point they played a lot more similar a style closer to what we now see the Celtics doing, where they were a team that was just launching threes, particularly when they first got Mike Budenholzer. They are a team that on the season has watched their opponent take more threes than they have. And that's on top of what Kevin was just saying about the fact of who do you really trust off their bench? It used to be at one point Pat Connaughton. It used to be Bobby Portis. Maybe it still is Bobby Portis, but he hasn't played all that well. This gets back to the idea of also it's a team that defensively, while they have skill, Giannis, and they obviously have Brook Lopez, they just look too slow-footed. Some of that is Dame getting beat constantly at the point of attack and teams just blitzing right past him. But I feel like there's too many questions there, and maybe it will play out exactly the way Kevin was saying. A team that might fend for its own and do just fine in the regular season, despite the slow start. But it's hard to really look at them and say, this is a team I really believe in for postseason basketball. There's just too many holes from an efficiency standpoint in terms of areas that used to be big advantages for them. And there's just too many questions, I think, off their bench for right now.
And that's how they'll win these next 4 games easily and make us all look stupid because I generally agree. But we'll see. I will say this. I was with Kendrick Perkins today when he found out that Middleton was playing his first game back, in months, and he picked against the Celtics. And he was like, man, like, what happened playing against the cupcake? He's like, I want a cookie in my first game back from double ankle surgery. And so he was pretty surprised. Yeah. But hey, that means that maybe the expectations are low. So we'll see. Maybe Middleton, who's been getting ready for a long time, has something in store that's going to change that expectation. All right. Pelton, I've enjoyed it again. I've learned a lot, and we'll all be embarrassed with all the assumptions and statements we made here in a few months. But that's the nature of the NBA, and thank you for watching us, listening to us here at the Hoop Collective. Thank you to Jackson and Rafa, our producers. I'm in this new studio. Well, it's not new, but it's new to us in LA. You guys like this? You guys like this setup?
That's nice.
It's pretty nice. I went with I came off the NBA Today set, and I went with the loose tie look. It's kind of like, put my, look at this. I got Crypto.com Arena right behind me. I mean, come on, it's great. Anyway, thanks to everybody for putting that together. We'll be back with McMahon and Bontemps next week. Everybody have a great weekend.